Good morning, dear students. Let's start our lecture. The theme of the lecture: functional anatomy of cranial nerves. Questions of the lecture: general characteristics and classification of cranial nerves, topography of nucleus of cranial nerves on the rhomboid fossa, the functional anatomy of the first, second, and 8 pairs of cranial nerves. Then, the functional anatomy of the motor of the cranial nerves, of the 4th, 6th, 11th, and 12th pairs of cranial nerves. And last question, the functional anatomy of the mixed cranial nerves. So it is 5th, 7th, 9th, and 10th pairs of cranial nerves. First of all, you must know the plan of describing the cranial nerve. You must know the name of the nerve in Latin, the composition of fibers, the topography of nuclei, the exit of the nerve on the base of the brain, the exit of the nerve in the skull, main branches and their topography, and the innervations area. So, this is the plan of describing each cranial nerve. We have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. So, the first pair olfactory, second pair optic nerve, third pair oculomotor, next trochlear, trigeminal, sixth pair abducens nerve, 7 facial, next vestibular-cochlear, then glossopharyngeal, 10 pair vagus, 11 pair accessory, and 12 pair hypoglossal nerve. So we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Classification of cranial nerves of the composition of fibers. So you must know that motor nerves, 4, 6, 11, and 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Trochlear, abducens, accessory, and hypoglossal. Sensitive nerves: olfactory, the first pair, optic nerve, second pair, and vestibular-cochlear, 8 pair. And mixed nerves: third pair oculomotor nerve, next trigeminal, next facial, next glossopharyngeal, and vagus. The projection of the nuclei of cranial nerves. At the level of the tectum of mesencephaly, located nuclei of oculomotor and trochlear pairs of nerves. At the level of the dorsal part of the pontis, located nuclei of trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibular-cochlear pairs of nerves. And at the dorsal part of the medulla oblongata, located nuclei of glossopharyngeal nerve, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. You must know this information. So look at this slide. You can see a rhomboid fossa, which is the bottom of the fourth ventricle. You know it. And this is the tectum, mesencephaly. You can see nuclei of the third pair, oculomotor and trochlear nervus. At the dorsal part of the pons, this is dorsal part of the pons, you can see nuclei of the trigeminal, abducens, facial, and vestibular-cochlear nervus. And at the level of the dorsal surface of the medulla oblongata, you can see nuclei of the glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal nerve. You know this information. Again, this is nucleus of the oculomotor nerve. This is nucleus of the trochlear nerve located at the colliculi inferior of the tectum of mesencephaly. And this is rhomboid fossa, upper part, dorsal part of the pons, located nuclei of the abducens, facial, trigeminal nerve, and vestibular-cochlear nervus. And at the dorsal part of the medulla oblongata, you can see nuclei of the glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal nerve. From the cranial nervous, from the cranial or from the skull, nervous exit through the holes. You know this information too. Repeat after me. Through the lamina cribrosa goes olfactory nerve. Then through the canalis opticus, this is canalis opticus, goes optic nerve. Next, fissura orbitalis superior. Through this fissura go oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, abducens nerve, and the first branch of trigeminal nerve. This is foramen rotundum. Through this foramen goes the second branch of the trigeminal nerve, maxillary nerve. Next, this is foramen ovale. Through this foramen goes the third branch of trigeminal nerve, mandibular nerve. Next, structure porus acousticus internus. This is porus acousticus internus. Through this structure go two pairs of cranial nerves, facial and vestibular-cochlear nerve. This is foramen jugulare. Through this foramen go three pairs of cranial nerves, glossopharyngeal, vagus, and accessory nerves. And this is canalis hypoglossus. Through this canalis goes hypoglossal nerve. So the first pair of cranial nerves, olfactory nerves. Sensitive nerves, the first pair sensitive nerves, number 2, 15 or 20, a small nerves which don't have nucleus, innervate the mucosa of olfactory area of the nose. Olfactory nerves innervate the mucosa of olfactory area of the nose. Also, you must know where is situated the analyzer of olfactory. You know this information. The analyzer of olfactory is in the vaulted or fornicatus gyrus, which include cinguli gyrus, cinguli, and parahippocampus gyrus, and uncus, and hippocampus. So, this is structures of the analyzer of olfactory. Next pair, the optic nerve, the second pair. This is sensitive nerve 2, don't have nucleus, innervate the retina of our eye. Innervate the retina. This is optic nervous. Each optic nerve has 4 parts. Intraocular part, the first part, intraocular, located inside bulbus oculi. Next, the longest part of the optic nerve, intraorbital, number 2 of the picture. Intraorbital part, the longest part of the optic nerve, located in our orbita. Next, intracanal part, which goes through the optic canal, number 4 in the picture. And the last part, intracranial part, number 5, intracranial part, located inside the skull, and goes until chiasm, until optic chiasm. Once again, the optic nerve has 4 parts: intraocular part, intraorbital part, intracanal part, and intracranial part, until the optic chiasm. Look, you can see 2 optic nerves, left and right, and this is optic chiasm. And after optic chiasm, you can see optic tracts, left and right, no nerves, optic tracts. Also, you must know subcortical centers and cortical centers of our vision. You know this information too. Subcortical centers of vision are the upper colliculus of mesencephalon, and lateral geniculate bodies of metathalamus. Subcortical centers of our vision. And the analyzer or cortical center, located in the occipital lobe of our brain, in the calcarine sulcus. Next sensitive nerve, the 8th pair, the vestibular-cochlear nerve. The vestibular-cochlear nerve. It consists of 2 parts, cochlear and vestibular. Look, this is cochlear part of this nerve, and this is vestibular part of this nerve. It has 6 nuclei. 2 cochlear nuclei, front and back, cochlear, front and back, or anterior and posterior, and 4 vestibular nuclei, medial, Schwalbe, lateral, Daters, superior, Bechterews, and lower, Roller. You know this information too. Cochlear part of the 8th nerve is conducting auditory impulses from the spiral organ. situated in the cochlea of the inner ear. Vestibular part of the eighth nerve carries the impulses that give information on the position and motion of the body in space. The receptor apparatus perceiving statokinetic irritation is in the membranosus labyrinth of the inner ear, namely in the semicircular ducts, bags and vestibule of inner ear. You also must know the subcortical centers of hearing and cortical centers of our hearing or analyzer. Subcortical centers of hearing are in the lower colliculus of mesencephalon and in the medial geniculate bodies of metathalamus. And the analyzer of hearing is in the temporal lobe, upper temporal gyrus, where located gyri of Geschle, a short transverse temporal gyri. Next pair, the fourth pair of the cranial nerves, trochlear nerve. It is motor nerve because it is innervate the muscle. Motor nerve, it has one motor nucleus which located at the level of the inferior colliculus of mesencephalon. This nerve leaves skull through the upper suborbital fissura, and the trochlear nerve innervates only one muscle of our eye, innervates the upper oblique muscle of the eye. This is trochlear nerve, which innervates the upper oblique or superior oblique muscle of the eye. Next, sixth pair of the cranial nerves, the abducens nerve. This is abducens nerve. It is motor nerve 2. It has one motor nucleus which situated at the level of the dorsal part of the pons of the rhomboid fossa, leaves skull through the upper orbital fissura 2 and innervates also only one muscle, the lateral rectus muscle of the eye. So, once again, the abducens nerve innervates the lateral rectus muscle of the eye. On the slide you can see types of strabismus. This is esotropia, and this is exotropia. Exotropia, it may be the pathology of the oculomotor nerve, and esotropia, it may be the pathology of the abducens nerve. Next, motor nerve, the 11th pair, the accessory nerve. The accessory nerve is the 11th paired cranial nerve. It has a purely somatic motor function, innervating the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscle. Traditionally, the accessory nerve is divided into spinal and cranial parts. This nerve traverses the posterior cranial fossa to reach the jugular foramen along with the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves. Look, you can see two parts of the accessory nerve. This is cranial parts and spinal part. So you must know that the accessory nerve is the motor nerve, motor cranial nerve, and also you must know that this nerve innervates two muscles of our body, sternocleidomastoid muscle and trapezius muscle of our back. Sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscle of our back. Next, motor nerve, the hypoglossal nerve, the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. This nerve has a purely somatic motor function, innervating the proper muscles of the tongue, superior longitudinal muscle, inferior longitudinal muscle of the tongue, vertical and transverse muscle of the tongue, proper muscle of the tongue. The hypoglossal nerve arises from the hypoglossal nuclei in the medulla oblongata of the brain, and this nerve exits the cranium via the hypoglossal canal. This is hypoglossal nerve. It innervates muscles of the tongue. Once again, superior longitudinal, inferior longitudinal, transverse muscle and vertical muscle of the tongue. And also this nerve innervates muscles of the infrahyoid group, such as sternohyoid, sternothyroid, thyrohyoid and omohyoid muscle. You know these muscles. So once again, the hypoglossal nerve is a motor nerve, innervates the proper muscle of our tongue, and also it innervates muscles of the infrahyoid group. Next group of the cranial nerves, mixed nerves. First of all, I'm explaining to you the oculomotor nerve, the third cranial nerve, the oculomotor nerve. It is a mixed nerve. It offers motor and parasympathetic innervation to many of the ocular structures. Nuclei are at the mesencephalon, at the level of the upper colliculus of the mesencephalon. This nerve leaves the cranial cavity via the superior orbital fissura. At this point, it is divided into superior and inferior branches. Superior branch of this nerve innervates the superior rectus muscle and levator palpebrae superioris. Two muscles innervates by the superior branch of oculomotor nerve. And inferior branch of this nerve innervates the inferior rectus, medial rectus and inferior oblique muscles of our eye. Parasympathetic fibers of the inferior branch innervate the sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscles. Sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscles. Look, you can see oculomotor nerve. And also you must know that this nerve divided into superior branch and inferior. Superior branch innervates two muscles, superior rectus and levator palpebrae superioris. And inferior branch innervates inferior oblique, medial and inferior rectus muscle of our eye. Look, this is medial rectus, inferior rectus. This is inferior oblique. And also you can see levator palpebrae superioris muscle and superior rectus muscle, which innervates by the superior branch of this nerve. And also you must know that inferior branch has parasympathetic fibers too. This green color, this is parasympathetic fibers, which innervates sphincter papillae and ciliar muscle of our eye. Next pair, mixed nerve, the largest nerve of the cranial nerves, the trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal nerve, the fifth paired cranial nerve. It is also the largest cranial nerve. The trigeminal nerve originates from the three sensory nuclei, mesencephalic, principal sensory, and spinal nuclei of the trigeminal nerve, and one motor nucleus. In the middle cranial fossa, the sensory root expands into the trigeminal ganglion. This is trigeminal ganglion. After the trigeminal ganglion nerve consists of three branches. The first branch, ophthalmic nerve. Second branch, maxillary nerve. And the third branch, mandibular nerve. So, trigeminal nerve consists of three nerves, three branches. The first, ophthalmic nerve. The second, maxillary nerve. And the third, mandibular nerve. Sensory function. The three terminal branches of the trigeminal nerve innervate the skin, mucous membranous, and sinuses of the face. Motor functions. Only the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve has motor fibers. You must know it. Only the mandibular branch. So, ophthalmic and mandibular and maxillary nerves are sensitive nerves. But mandibular branch of this nerve, mixed nerve, because it has sensitive and motor fibers. So mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve innervates the muscles of the mastication. Medial pterygoid, lateral pterygoid, masseter and temporal. And also mandibular branch innervates tensor veli palatini and tensor tympani. Once again, mandibular branch of trigeminal nerve are mixed branch because it has motor and sensitive fibers. Motor fibers of this nerve innervate the muscles of the mastication and also tensor veli palatini and tensor tympani. The trigeminal nerve has a lot of branches. You can see branches of the ophthalmic nerve. This is maxillary nerve with its branch, maxillary nerve, and this is mandibular nerve with its branches. Also, you can see trigeminal ganglion, ophthalmic nerve with its branch, maxillary nerve with its branch, and mandibular nerve. Look at this slide. You can see the zones of innervation of the skin branches of the trigeminal nerve. Number 1, this is zone of innervation of the skin branches of ophthalmic nerve, the first branch of the trigeminal nerve. Number 2, this is a zone of innervation of the skin branches of the maxillary nerve, the second branch of the trigeminal nerve. And number 3, this is zone of innervation of the skin branches of mandibular nerve. Mandibular nerve, the third branch of the trigeminal nerve. Next, mixed nerve, facial nerve, seventh pair of the cranial nervous, facial nerve. It has 3 nuclei: solitary tract, motor, and top salivarius. You know this information. It lies in the canal of the facial nerve in the skull. This is facial canal with facial nerve located in the facial canal of the skull. This is mixed nerve. It has sensitive, motor, and parasympathetic functions. Motor functions. This nerve innervates the muscles of the facial expression, the posterior venter of the digastric, the stylohyoid, and the stapedius muscles. Spatial sensory provides spatial taste sensation to the anterior 2-3 of the tongue. Parasympathetic functions supplies many of the glands of the head and neck, including the submandibular, sublingual, nasal, palatine, lacrimal, and pharyngeal gland. Within the parotid gland, the facial nerve terminates by bifurcating into 5 motor branches. 5 motor branches. These branches innervate the muscles of facial expression. Temporal branch innervates the frontal, orbicularis oculi, and corrugator supercilii muscles. Zygomatic branch innervates the orbicularis oculi. Buccal branch innervates the orbicularis oris, buccinator, and zygomatic muscles. Marginal mandibular branch innervates the mentalis muscle. And cervical branch innervates the platysma. This is cervical branch innervates the platysma. Look, this is branches, motor branches of the facial nerve, which innervate mimic muscles. You can see temporal branches, zygomatic branches, buccal, marginal mandibular branch, and cervical branch. And this is natural branches of parotid plexus of the facial nerve. This structure has name pes anserinus major in Latin. Pes anserinus major. This is pes anserinus major. Syndrome of the defeat of the facial nerve, you can see on this slide. Paralysis or severe weakness of the muscles of facial expression. Next nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, a 9 pair of the cranial nerve. It is mixed nerve. Mixed nerve. It has three nuclei. Solitary tract, double nuclei, and lower solivarius, located at the level of the dorsal part of the medulla oblongata, of the rhomboid fossa. Then it goes behind the olive of the medulla oblongata. The nerve traverses to the posterior cranial fossa to reach the jugular foramen. The glossopharyngeal nerve provides taste sensation to the posterior 1 to 3 of the tongue via its lingual branch. The muscles of the pharynx are innervated by the glossopharyngeal nerve too. The nerve enters the pharynx by passing between the superior and middle pharyngeal constrictors. Within the pharynx, it terminates by dividing into several branches: lingual, tonsil, and pharyngeal. The glossopharyngeal nerve provides parasympathetic innervation to the parotid gland. Syndromes of the defeat of glossopharyngeal nerve: dysesthesia in the middle ear and throat, taste sensitivity in the back third of the tongue and palate, swallowing disorders, cessation of salivation from the parotid gland on the affected side, and dry mouth. And the last nerve, the last mixed nerve of our body, the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve of our body because it starts at the level of the medulla oblongata and terminates in the abdominal cavity. It has 3 nuclei: solitary tract, double, and rear or dorsalis parasympathetic nucleus. It goes behind the olive of the medulla oblongata. The nerve traverses the posterior cranial fossa to reach the jugular foramen with glossopharyngeal and accessory nerves. This nerve has several departments of the vagus nerve: the head, the neck, from the place of origin of the recurrence laryngeal nerve, the thoracic, next department, the thoracic, before exiting the apertura of the thoracic cavity, and last department, the abdominal. The vagus nerve has the longest course of all the cranial nerves, extending from the head to the abdomen. Sensory function: innervates the skin of the external acoustic meatus and the internal surfaces of the laryngopharynx and larynx. Spatial sensory provides taste sensation to the epiglottis and root of the tongue. Motor functions provides motor innervation to the majority of the muscles of the pharynx, soft palate, and larynx. Parasympathetic functions innervates the smooth muscle of the trachea, bronchi, and gastrointestinal tract and regulates heart rhythm. Look, this is left and right vagus nervus. Also, you can see vagus nervus too. This is vagus nervus. The unilateral defeat of the 10 pair, unilateral paralysis of the soft palate, it hangs on the affected side. Vocal fold paralysis, of voice up to aphonia, reduced pharyngeal reflex on the affected side. The bilateral defeat of the vagus nerve, cardiac arrhythmias, breathing, and other autonomic functions. Full bilateral defeat of function of the vagus nervus are not compatible with life. So today I'm explaining to you all information about cranial nervus. Our lecture is over. Thank you for your attention, students.